Villette is an 1853 novel written by English author Charlotte Brontë. After an unspecified family disaster, the protagonist Lucy Snow travels from her native England to the fictional continental city of Villette to teach at a girls' school, where she is drawn into adventure and romance. Charlotte Brontë RL Brontë, commonly T1, the 21st of April 1816 to the 31st of March 1855, was an English novelist and poet, the eldest of the three Brontë sisters who survived into adulthood and whose novels became classics of English literature. She is best known for her novel Jane Eyre, which she published under the gender-neutral pen name Currer Bell. Jane Eyre went on to become a success in publication, and is widely held in high regard in the Gothic fiction genre of literature. She enlisted in school at Roe Head, Mirfield, in January 1831, aged 14 years. She left the year after to teach her sisters, Emily and Anne, at home, returning in 1835 as a governess. In 1839, she undertook the role of governess for the Sidgwick family, but left after a few months to return to Haworth, where the sisters opened a school but failed to attract pupils. Instead, they turned to writing, and they each first published in 1846 under the pseudonyms of Currer, Ellis, and Acton Bell. Although her first novel, The Professor, was rejected by publishers, her second novel, Jane Eyre, was published in 1847. The sisters admitted to their Bell pseudonyms in 1848, and by the following year were celebrated in London literary circles. Charlotte Brontë was the last to die of all her siblings. She became pregnant shortly after her wedding in June 1854 but died on the 31st of March 1855, almost certainly from hyperemesis gravidarum, a complication of pregnancy which causes excessive nausea and vomiting. A. Locale. Edit. The novel is initially set in the English countryside, and later follows Lucy Snow, the main character, to the fictional town of Villette, a Gothic town where the majority of the action takes place. Villette is modeled upon the city of Brussels and is set in the fictional French-speaking kingdom of Labassecour, modeled on Belgium. Le Boscour is French for the farmyard. Characters. Edit. Lucy Snow, the narrator and main character of Villette. A quiet, self-reliant, intelligent, 23-year-old woman. Lucy has, as Miss Ginevra Fanshawe asserts, no attractive accomplishments, no beauty, as Lucy does her best not to stand out or form attachments. Although she seems to lack any living relatives, she is the goddaughter of Mrs. Breton. Though usually reserved and emotionally self-controlled, Lucy has strong feelings and affections for those whom she really values. She even sincerely cares for the giddy Ginevra, albeit in a blunt, curmudgeonly fashion. She is a firm Protestant and denounces Roman Catholicism as false god as not with Rome. She falls in love with M. Emmanuel and consents to marry him someday. With his help, Lucy leaves Madame Beck's and establishes her own school. M. Paul Emmanuel, an irascible, autocratic professeur at Madame Beck's pensionnat. He is also a relative of Madame Beck. Although he insults Lucy frequently, Lucy comes to relish his good qualities. He is generous, he delights in giving Lucy secret presents. He is kind and magnanimous, as is shown by his supporting and sheltering the elderly grandmother of his dead fiancée, Justine Marie, together with his former tutor, Père Silas, and a servant. He is a devout Catholic and tries to convert Lucy, a Protestant, to Catholicism but fails. As he grows closer to Lucy and falls in love with her, everyone in his life attempts to keep them apart, and he is eventually banished to a family-owned plantation in Guadeloupe for 3 years. At the end of the novel, it is strongly hinted that he dies in a shipwreck attempting to return to Labassecour. Dr. John Graham Breton, a handsome young English gentleman who is a physician. He is the son of Lucy's godmother, Mrs. Breton. He is described as cheerful, benignant, and bland. Lucy, when young, showed no particular fondness for him. However, when they meet again 10 years later, their cool friendship is more than rekindled, and Lucy secretly begins to cherish an affection for him. Graham does not return this affection, however, and calls her quiet Lucy Snow, and a being inoffensive as a shadow. He has, at first, a passion for Ginevra Fanshawe, until her love of money and a sneer at Mrs. Breton quenches his love at last. He then falls in love with Polly de Bassompierre. Lucy conquers her love for him and buries all his treasured letters to her, saying, "Good night, drive. John, you are good, you are beautiful, but you are not mine. Good night, and God bless you." John and Polly eventually marry and live a happy life together. Mrs. Louisa Breton, drive, John Graham Breton's mother and Lucy's godmother. She is a widow and has health without flaw, and her spirits of that tone and equality which are better than a fortune to the possessor. She is immensely proud of her son but is not above teasing him. Polly home Countess Paulina Mary de Bassompierre, a 17-year-old English girl who is a cousin of Ginevra Fanshawe. She is first introduced to the story as a very young girl, who is called Polly. As a child, she was very fond of Graham Bretton. She grows to be a beautiful young lady who is delicate and intelligent. Upon meeting Graham again, their friendship develops into love, and they eventually marry. Lucy says of her, she looked a mere doll, and describes her as shaped like a model. She and Lucy are friends. Although Lucy is often pained by Polly's relationship with Graham, she looks upon their happiness without a grudge. Mr. Home Count de Bassompierre, Polly's father, who inherited his noble title within recent years. He is a sensitive and thoughtful man who loves his daughter. When he notices Polly's relationship with Graham, he has difficulty recognizing and accepting that his daughter is now a grown woman. He regards her as a mere child and calls her his little treasure, or little Polly. He at last relinquishes Polly to Graham, saying, "May God deal with you as you deal with her." He lives to a ripe old age. Ginevra Fanshawe, a beautiful but shallow and vain 18-year-old English girl with a light, careless temperament. She is an incorrigible coquette and has a relish for flirtation. Although related to the Holmes Bassompierre as her own family is not wealthy, and she expects others to finance her lavish tastes. Lucy meets her on a ship journeying to France. Ginevra is a student at Madame Beck's, and it is her passing remark, "I wish you would come to Madame Beck's, she has some marmot's father, kids, you might look after, she wants an English gouvernante, or was wanting one 2 months ago," which prompts Lucy to go to Villette. Despite Ginevra's faults, Lucy has a certain fondness for her. Ginevra thinks of Lucy as caustic, ironic, and cynical, calling her old lady, dear crossbatch, and most frequently, Timon, after a Greek misanthrope who lived during the 5th century BC. Ginevra uses Graham shamelessly until he loses interest in her. She eventually elopes with and marries Count Alfred de Hamal and keeps in touch with Lucy via letters. Count Alfred de Hamal, a colonel count, Ginevra's suitor, has a continental appearance with delicate features. Ginevra Fanshawe states, "Colonel de Hamal is a gentleman of excellent connections, perfect manners, sweet appearance, with pale interesting face, and hair and eyes like an Italian. Then too he is the most delightful company possible, a man quite in my way, not sensible and serious like the other Dr. John, but one with whom I can talk on equal terms." Lucy disagrees with her and describes the Count as the doll, the puppet, the mannequin, the poor inferior creature. A mere lackey for Dr. John, his valet, his footboy. Madame Modeste Maria Beck, the owner and headmistress of the boarding school for girls where Lucy is employed. She is short and stout, but not uncomely. Her complexion is described as fresh. She looked well, though a little bourgeois. She has good sense and is an excellent administrator, though that is because she spies on everyone and goes through their possessions frequently. Lucy says, he had no heart to be touched. It reminded her where she was impotent and dead. Lucy further describes her as wise, firm, faithless, secret, crafty, passionless, watchful and inscrutable, acute and insensate, withal perfectly decorous. What more could be desired? She seems attracted to Graham at first, but that dies away quickly. She then seeks to marry Paul Emmanuel to keep him and his fortune under her thumb. She does all she can to keep Lucy and Paul apart, including conspiring with Père Silas. Rossini, the pretty but unprincipled portress at Madame Beck's boarding school. She is smart, trim, and pert, and not a bad sort of person, according to Lucy. She likes to be bribed. Père Silas, an elderly Catholic priest who makes it his mission, and later Emmanuel's, to convert Lucy. He is the mentor of Paul Emmanuel, and uses the latter's love of the late Justine Marie to manipulate him. He is instrumental in keeping Paul and Lucy apart. Justine Marie, a deceased novitiate nun, the former love of Paul Emmanuel. She had originally hoped to marry him, but her family's objections led her to join a convent. During her time at Madame Beck's, Lucy suspects she is being haunted by Justine's ghost. Plot. Edit. Villette begins with its protagonist and unreliable narrator, Lucy Snow, aged 14, staying at the home of her godmother Mrs. Bretton in the clean and ancient town of Bretton, in England. Also in residence are Mrs. Bretton's teenage son, John Graham Bretton, whom the family calls Graham, and a young visitor, Paulina Home, who is called Polly, who is aged 6. Polly's mother, who neglected her daughter, has recently died and her father is recommended by doctors to travel to improve his spirits. Polly is invited by Mrs. Brontë to stay. Polly is a serious little girl, who is described as unlike normal children. Polly soon develops a deep devotion to Graham, who showers her with attention. But Polly's visit is cut short when her father arrives to summon her to live with him abroad. For reasons that are not stated, Lucy leaves Mrs. Bronté's home a few weeks after Polly's departure. Some years pass, during which an unspecified family tragedy leaves Lucy without family, home, or means. After some initial hesitation, she is hired as a caregiver by Miss Marchmont, a rheumatic crippled woman. Lucy is soon accustomed to her work and has begun to feel content with her quiet, frugal lifestyle. The night of a dramatic storm, Miss Marchmont regains all her energy and feels young again. She shares with Lucy her sad love story of 30 years ago, and concludes that she should treat Lucy better and be a better person. She believes that death will reunite her with her dead lover. The next morning, Lucy finds Miss Marchmont died in the night. Lucy then leaves the English countryside and goes to London. At the age of 23, she boards a ship for Labassecour despite knowing very little French. On the ship, she meets Ginevra Fanshawe, who tells Lucy that the directress of her boarding school for girls based upon the Haget's Brussels pensionnat she is attending, Madame Beck, needs a bond for her children. She travels to the city of Villette in Labassecour where Madame Beck's school is located. After a time, she is hired to teach English at the school, in addition to having to mind Madame Beck's 3 children. She thrives despite Madame Beck's constant spying on the staff and students. Dr. John, a handsome English doctor, frequently visits the school at the behest of Madame Beck, and deepens his affection for the coquette Ginevra Fanshawe. In one of Villette's famous plot twists, Drive, John is later revealed to be John Graham Bretton, a fact that Lucy has known since he once asked her why she was staring at him, but has deliberately concealed from the reader. During the school holidays, all the teachers and pupils have either gone to travel abroad or gone back to their families. The school is completely empty except for a disabled child whom Lucy is supposed to take care of. After the disabled child is fetched away, Lucy is extremely lonely and becomes both mentally and physically ill. She goes to a Catholic church despite being a Protestant to confess to a priest. On the way back to the school, she collapses due to fever and mental exhaustion. Dr. John brings her to his home, which he shares with his mother, Mrs. Bretton. Graham recognizes Lucy only after she is brought to Mrs. Bretton's home. After Dr. John, i.e., Graham discovers Ginevra's true character while at the theater, he turns his attention to Lucy, and they become close friends. She values this friendship highly despite her usual emotional reserve. Lucy soon develops feelings for Dr. John and treasures the letters he sends her once she returns to the pensionnat. Lucy and Graham meet Paulina home again at the same theater after a fire, in which Polly is injured. Polly's father has inherited the title, de Bassompierre, and is now a count, thus her name is now Paulina Mary Home de Bassompierre. Polly and Graham soon discover that they knew each other in the past and slowly renew their friendship. They fall in love and eventually marry despite the initial reluctance of Polly's father. Lucy becomes progressively closer to a colleague, the irascible, autocratic, and confrontational Professeur M. Paul Emmanuel, a relative of me. Beck. Lucy gradually realizes that his apparent antagonism is actually helping her to overcome her weaknesses and to grow. She and Paul eventually fall in love. However, a group of conspiring antagonists, including Madame Beck, the priest Per Silas, and the relatives of M. Paul's long-dead fiancé, work to keep the two apart, on the grounds that a union between a Catholic and a Protestant is impossible. They finally succeed in forcing M. Paul's departure for Guadeloupe to oversee a plantation there. He nonetheless declares his love for Lucy before his departure and arranges for her to live independently as the headmistress of her own day school, which she later expands into a pensionnat. During the course of the novel, Lucy has 3 encounters with the figure of a nun, which may be the ghost of a nun who was buried alive on the school's grounds as punishment for breaking her vow of chastity. In a highly symbolic scene near the end of the novel, she discovers the nun's habit in her bed and destroys it. She later finds out that it was a disguise worn by Ginevra's amour, Alfred de Hamal, placed in Lucy's bed as a prank. The episodes with the nun no doubt contributed substantially to the novel's reputation as a Gothic novel. Ginevra keeps in contact with Lucy through letters that show the young coquette has not changed and expects to live off of her uncle's Bassompierre's good graces. Villette's final pages are ambiguous. Although Lucy says that she wants to leave the reader free to imagine a happy ending, she hints strongly that Paul's ship was destroyed by a storm during his return journey from the West Indies. She says that Emmanuel was away 3 years. Reader, they were the 3 happiest years of my life. This passage suggests that he was drowned by the destroying angel of tempest. Brontë described the ambiguity of the ending as a little puzzle, quoted in Chapter 12 of Part 2 of Gaskell's Life. Themes. Villette is noted not so much for its plot as for its acute tracing of Lucy's psychology. The novel, in a Gothic setting, simultaneously explores themes of isolation, doubling, displacement and subversion, and each of their impacts upon the protagonist's psyche. 1. Villette is sometimes celebrated as an exploration of gender roles and repression. In The Madwoman and Attic, critics Sandra Gilbert and Susan Gubar have argued that the character of Lucy Snow is based in part on William Wordsworth's Lucy poems. Gilbert and Gubar emphasize the idea of feminine rewriting. Further explanation needed. Some critics have explored the issues of Lucy's psychological state in terms of what they call patriarchal constructs, which form her cultural context. 2. Villette also explores isolation and cross-cultural conflict in Lucy's attempts to master the French language, as well as conflicts between her English Protestantism and Catholicism. Her denunciation of Catholicism is unsparing, e.g., God is not with Rome. Critical reception. Edit. George Eliot believed Villette a still more wonderful book than Jane Eyre. There is something almost preternatural in its power. 3. There are so few books, and so many volumes. Among the few stands Villette. George Henry Lewis. Citation needed. Virginia Woolf claims that Villette is Charlotte Bronte's finest novel, and highlights its evocative descriptions of the natural world as a reflection of the main character's state of mind. 4. The Daily Telegraph's Lucy Hughes Hallett argues that Villette is greater than Bronte's most famous work, Jane Eyre. She states that the novel is an astonishing piece of writing, a book in which phantasmagorical set pieces alternate with passages of minute psychological exploration, and in which Bronte's marvelously flexible prose veers between sardonic wit and stream of consciousness, in which the syntax bends and flows and threatens to dissolve completely in the heat of madness, drug-induced hallucination and desperate desire. 5. Claire Fallon of the Huffington Post notes that Villette shares many themes with Bronte's previous works such as Jane Eyre, yet highlights the dichotomy between the 2 novels' protagonists. Villette bears a certain Brontean resemblance to Jane Eyre: Gothic mysticism, spiritual intensity, bursts of passionate lyricism, a plain heroine making her way in an unfriendly world, but is in many other ways its inverse. Jane Eyre works in sharp black and white, while Villette works in psychological and even factual gray areas. Where Jane's specialness is stipulated, despite her poverty and plain looks, the heroine of Villette, Lucy Snow, is an unassuming figure who spends the majority of the novel as a quiet observer. Jane insists on her own agency, while Lucy is reactive at best. Yet it is Lucy who truly breaks free of the expected domestic fate. 6.